Hello everybody, my name is Sal DeFusco and I'd like to welcome you to our series here of free guitar lessons for beginners. My goal here with these lessons is to really help you to understand all the aspects of learning how to play guitar. This is designed for anybody who has never touched a guitar before and you're picking it up for the first time, you just bought your guitar and you want to learn the basics of guitar playing. So my goal is to really be able to explain all the material in as much detail as possible so that you're able to really grasp, again from the beginning, all the elements of learning how to play the guitar. So in order to really learn your instrument thoroughly, I believe it is crucially important to have a basic understanding of the concepts of music theory. So we will attempt to really help you, again in detail, understand the basics of music and the basics of music theory. So again, I believe music theory is crucial, important to your development as a musician, as a guitar player. So to make sure that you really grasp and learn music theory, you need to review it and go over it often. So on our website, guitarleading.com, we've provided a tutorial for you, an ebook, to give you, again, a lot of the basics of music theory. We recommend that you download that and study it. And within the ebook, you'll see a series of quizzes that can help you to see and to gauge your understanding of music theory. Because again, it's going to be very important for you to understand it in order to really be the best guitar player you can. So the first thing that we will look at here is the half step, also known as the semitone. Now, the half step is the smallest musical interval commonly used in Western tonal music. If you look on the guitar fretboard and you move up on the same string, the adjacent frets, you will have what is called the half step. So every fret that you go up on the guitar is a half step apart. Now the whole step is simply just two half steps apart. So if we go up 2 frets on the guitar, we have what is called a whole step. So now we'll move on to the names of the musical notes. Now we have what is called the musical alphabet, and it starts with A and it goes through G. So the musical alphabet is A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, so in order to analyze the intervals of the musical notes, which means the distance between the notes, we use half steps as the basic grid. So we see here clearly that between A and B, there are 2 half steps, so that makes a whole step. So we have, therefore, a space between A and B. Now, interestingly, we see between B and C only a half step. So B and C are adjacent frets. Now, between C and D, we see also, again, just like A and B, a whole step, same as 2 half steps, which makes the whole. Then between D and E, it is also the same thing. We have a whole step. Now again, and you got to be careful, between E and F, we only have a half step. So the same thing between B and C, and now E and F, we have a half step. And then lastly, between F and G, we have a whole step. So it's very important for us to remember that between the E and the F and the B and the C notes are half steps between E and F, B, and C. So very important to memorize that. All the other notes between A and B, C and D, D and E, F and G are whole steps, also known as 2 half steps. Okay, at this time we'll discuss what is known as the octave. So you might be asking, now what happens when we go from A to G? What happens after G? Well, what happens is the musical alphabet begins all over again. So after G, you start back to A. So let me explain the octave to you. Now, when two notes are 12 half steps apart, these two notes are considered to be the same. Now, they have the same sound characteristic, only the pitch will be higher. Now, this is the so-called octave. So again, we use the same letter name for octave notes. So now, viewing the illustration here, you can count on the screen that between A to the next A, there are 12 grids. So they are 12 half steps. So it's very important for you to know that, of course, the musical alphabet goes from A to G. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So the next note after G will be an A, and we'll start all over again. So now we'll talk about the staff. Now the staff is what we use to write notation as written music. So if we count the bottom line to the top, we count the first line, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Now in between those, we see that there are the 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now again, this is the grid, if you will, where we can notate notes either on the line or between the line in the space. The higher we go with our notation, the higher the pitch will be. In the same way, if we go lower, the lower the pitch will be. Let's discuss the ledger lines. Now, when you need to put pitches either above or below the staff, so a short line is added either above or below the staff to extend the staff. So now we'll talk about clefs. Now, the clef that is used for most guitar music is called the treble clef. Now, there are different types of clefs, and another one that is very common is called the bass clef. So that is used to go into lower pitches. So there are many pitches and many notes. That's why we need different clefs. So the treble clef, we will have the higher pitches, and then the bass clef, we can go into lower pitches. So let's look at here the notes on the treble clef. The first one here we have is C, which is placed on the first ledger line right below the staff. The next one we have here is D, which is a note below the staff, as we see here. Then we have the note placed on the first line, which is E. Then we see the note placed on the first space, and that is F. Now, as we climb up, the next one we have is the second line. We have G. Then on the very next space, the second space, we have A. Then the third line, we have B. On the third space, we have C. Then next we have on the fourth line of the staff, D. We see here the fourth space of the staff, E. Then on the very top line, the fifth line, we have F. Then the note we have that is placed above the staff, we see G. Now we have our first ledger line above the staff, and that note is A. Then we have the note placed above the first ledger line, and that note is B. Now we also have an additional ledger line, so 2 ledger lines above the staff, and the note placed on that second ledger line is known as C. Okay, so now let's talk about accidentals. Now we have a couple of different accidentals that we'll look at. The first one is called the flat. So when we see this symbol placed beside a note, it means that it lowers the pitch by 1/2 step. Now this one is called the sharp. So when we see this symbol placed beside a note, it raises that pitch by 1/2 step. So as we discussed earlier, we learned that there are some notes that are a 1/2 step apart and some notes that are a whole step apart. Now I would like to introduce to you the pitches that are between those notes, which are a whole step apart. So again, we can use the flat or the sharp to define those pitches. So for example, we see that between A and B, we have a whole step. Between A and B, those notes are a whole step apart. So the pitches between A and B can be defined in 2 ways, either as A sharp or B flat. So you might be asking, so could we have one note that has 2 different names? Well, yes we can, and that is called enharmonic. So in modern musical notation, the same pitch might have different names. So for example, A sharp is also known as B flat. C sharp is also known as D flat. So again, it's very important to understand that those pitches are the same. So we see that between D and E, we have a D sharp, which you can also call an E flat. Now also between F and G, we have F sharp, also known as G flat. And lastly, between G and A, we have G sharp, which can also be called A flat. So now it's very important for you to make sure that you understand the concept of enharmonic, which means that each pitch can have more than one name. So for instance, we talked about between A and B, we have either an A sharp or a B flat. So same thing moving on up. If we go between C and D, we have a C sharp, which can also be known as a D flat. So now at this time, I'd like to introduce to you the C major scale. Now the C major scale consists of all natural notes. So we see here that the first note of a C major scale is C. Now there is also another way that you can define it in what is called solfege syllables. And we see the first degree of a C major scale also being known as Do. The second note here we have in the C major scale is D. Now that solfege syllable is called Re. Now we see that between C and D, as we learned earlier, is a whole step. The third note in a C major scale we have is E. Now the solfege syllable is called Mi. The fourth note we have in the C major scale is F. The solfege syllable being Fa. Now we notice here, as we talked about before, that between E and F is only a half step. So now between F and G, the next note in the C major scale, also with the solfege syllable being Sol, we have a whole step. The next note is A, with the solfege syllable being La. And between Sol and La, between G and A, we have a whole step. The next note is a B, which is the solfege syllable T. And between La and T, between A and B, we have a whole step. Then the next note to finish out the octave of the C major scale, we have C, which takes us back to Do. Now we see again that between B and C, we have a half step. So there is a way to also analyze the scale degrees of a major scale using numbers. So we see here the first degree of the major scale we can analyze as 1, and then the second being 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then back to 1. Remembering that between 3 and 4, and also 7 and 1, we have half steps, and then the rest of them being whole steps. So again, it's very important that you memorize these different elements of the scale. So for instance, if we have a C note in the key of C, C major scale, what solfege syllable would it be? Do. Right. How would you analyze that particular note within the C major scale? By using the number 1. So let's try this. How about La? What would La be in the key of C major? Very important to be able to know right off the bat that that would be an A. Well, what scale degree would that also be? Very important to know right away that that's a 6. Let's try one more. How about E? What solfege syllable would an E be in the key of C major? Well, we know that to be Mi. Now, how would you analyze E in a C major scale? Right, by using the number 3. So again, very important to memorize in every scale that we'll study the note names, how to analyze them, and the solfege syllables for all the notes.